TV Spotlight. One Foot in the Grave. One Foot in the Grave was the name of a British television sitcom that ran for 6 seasons and 6 or 7 Christmas specials from 1990 to 2000. The series was written by David Renwick, a veteran British comedy writer whose previous work included Whoops Apocalypse and the satirical newspaper comedy Hot Metal in the 1980s. I've actually done a video on Hot Metal if you care to search it out. And whose One Foot in the Grave was probably his biggest success to date, only to be equalled by another big success later in the 1990s in the form of the tongue-in-cheek mystery series Jonathan Creek. The series starred Richard Wilson and Annette Crosbie as Victor and Margaret Meldrew. Richard Wilson was another veteran of British television comedy. He actually appeared in the second season of David Renwick's Hot Metal, though probably his biggest role previously was as a regular on the hospital comedy series Only When I Laugh that ran for 4 seasons from 1979 into the early 80s. Annette Crosbie, who played his long-suffering wife Margaret, was another veteran Scottish actress who had appeared in just about everything, from the likes of Callan in the early 70s, to Taggart in the 80s, to Doctor Who in the 2010s. The series focused on Victor and Margaret Meldrew, played by Wilson and Crosbie. Victor is a man entering into old age or upper middle age, who's basically forced into early retirement when he's made redundant from his job at the very beginning of the show, something that does not sit well with him. Victor is fairly low on tolerance for the stupidities of other people and the frustrations of everyday life, and has an often explosive temper. The series was a massive success, going from a slow start with its first series in 1990 to becoming one of the biggest sitcoms on BBC throughout the rest of the decade. The name Victor Meldrew became something of a catch-all phrase for grumpy old people who complain about everything, though as many people, including David Renwick, have pointed out, Victor's reactions are entirely in proportion to the things that happen to him. They range from the petty frustrations of everyday life and dealing with stupid and ignorant people, to the unfortunate reality that circumstances in this show tend to seemingly deliberately conspire to put him in the most surreal, insane, and infuriating situations imaginable. Fate, it seems, has a sense of humour, and unfortunately Victor often finds himself the butt of the joke. Other characters in the series included Margaret's friend, the perpetually blasé and somewhat irritating Mrs. Warboys, played by Doreen Mantle, and Victor and Margaret's next-door neighbours, Patrick and Pippa, played by Angus Dayton and Janine Davitsky. Patrick, in particular, becomes somewhat obsessed with Victor, with those fateful circumstances I mentioned a moment ago, often seemingly deliberately conflating to put Victor in the worst possible light imaginable to his neighbour, to the point that Patrick becomes convinced that his elderly next-door neighbour is not only engaged in some kind of vindictive, spiteful war against him, but is also completely and utterly insane. One Foot in the Grave, on the surface, looks like a fairly typical middle-class British sitcom of the era. The great thing about One Foot in the Grave, of course, is that under the surface it's not really any such thing. It's considerably more subversive, considerably cleverer, and often quite dark, certainly much more so than shows of this ilk. There's a very black sense of humour running throughout One Foot in the Grave, as well as a sense of melancholy coming from the fact that we are dealing with elderly people in the twilight of their lives. Now, I am pleased to say that I was in on One Foot in the Grave from the very first season in 1990. I'm also very pleased to say that, unlike a number of shows that I started watching in the early 90s, that just did not seem to make it to Australia, or at least didn't run their entire course, like Watching and On the Up, One Foot in the Grave was as big a success on Australian television as it was in the UK, so I got to see all of it. With one sole exception. That sole exception being the last of the Christmas specials, which was Endgame in 1997. Now, for some reason, as far as I am aware, the ABC never showed Endgame, which is really weird because the show was hugely popular, and indeed they showed the last season, which was in 2000, which was several years after Endgame. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but this was the 1990s. These were the days when I would pore over the latest TV weeks to see what was on, because these were the days where there actually were things on TV that I watched. As far as I'm aware, they did not show Endgame back in the day, which really frustrated me. And it took until, I don't know, late-ish 2000s when the DVDs came out that I was actually able to see that, which was kind of weird. I just don't understand that. They showed all the other Christmas specials, and they showed the whole series right through to the end. But as far as I'm aware, they never showed Endgame, which is really odd. I love One Foot in the Grave. It's one of my favourite comedy series of all time. I was there right from the beginning, like I said. And I have to be honest, since, I'm not sure exactly when, but probably mid-ish, late-ish 2000s, it has become basically my tradition to watch a One Foot in the Grave Christmas special every single Christmas, usually Christmas Eve. And according to the Wikipedia, there's actually 7 Christmas specials. I didn't realise that The Man in the Long Coat was actually a Christmas special. It doesn't. I don't think it says that on the DVD, which is kind of weird. Okay, I always thought there were just 6. Okay. Anyway, with the assumption that there were just 6, it takes like 6 years to get through them all. So it's not like you get sick of them watching the same one every year. No, I just watch a One Foot in the Grave Christmas special every year. Now I know that most British viewers will be aware of them, although I don't think it's. Unfortunately, I don't think it's shown as often as it used to be over there these days. It's probably too un-PC or something. Probably too funny for the woke turds, you know what they're like these days. I don't know whether any American viewers are aware of this. If you're not, and you love good British comedy, I cannot recommend One Foot in the Grave highly enough. It's one of my favourite comedy series of all time. It stands up to rewatching, and like I said, the Christmas specials are a Christmas tradition in my house. I heartily recommend One Foot in the Grave.